I've been saying I was going to do this for a while, and as you see the title, it's talking about the white gynocracy, right? This goes out to FD Signifier because he talks about the patriarchy like every other sentence. Just like any other intersectional or even regular feminist talk about fighting the patriarchy. Even I kind of disagree with my esteemed professor, Dr. Tommy Curry, our residential Imhotep, residential genius. Disagree with him about the patriarchy. I believe it does not exist. And me and Dr. Green Gorilla have surmised that the patriarchy really died a couple hundred years ago, or was on its deathbed a couple hundred years ago. But in my essence, the patriarchy, the Western patriarchy that goes all the way back to the Hittites, through the Greeks, through the Romans, and into Europe through the Roman Catholic Church, and even across to the Orthodox that's in Russia, right? Is the history of Western patriarchy. And coinciding with the Industrial Revolution, it set the groundwork for the end of what we call patriarchy, what they call the Empire of the Father. So I'm just going to show you just a little bit of where we get this from, where I get this from. This is actually a note coming from Columbia Law School by Sarah Abramowitz, and it's called English Child Custody Law 1660 to 1839, the origins of the judicial intervention in paternal custody. And it talks about the doctrine, the Court of Chancery's application of the doctrine of parents patriarchy, basically parental oversight by the court, or by the king, as it's been done, because the king is supposed to be the overseer of all like orphan children and people that can't help themselves. The court actually oversees this. According to that doctrine, the king has the right to intervene. And I said, as this note will recount, some scholars have, like Blackstone, seen paternal rights as absolute under English law until the passage of 1839 statute, which created a certain maternal custody rights, right? It's called the Custody of Infants Law. Others have noted the extent to which the Empire Father was qualified even before 1839, but no scholar has observed the irony that the origin of the incursions to this empire was the father's acquisition of the right to appoint testamentary guardians. Once the father was granted a means of extending his power through legal instrument, judicial interpretation and discretion seeped into his empire, and once the judicial discretion entered, even through initially the guise of strengthening the paternal rights, the empire of custody, child custody, was no longer the father's, but that of the judge. In short, it documents that the empire of the father fell, and that its fall originated not in 1839, but in 1660. Statute was meant to strengthen them. The Court of Chancery. The Court of the Chancery's power to intervene in paternal custody. That started in 1660 with the Tenures Act that gave court the right to determine guardianship over a child, which is what was argued in 1804, but also which Caroline Norton used to actually petition Parliament to change the law and say that the court has the ultimate power to actually intervene in paternal custody. In other words, paternal custody, or father's custody, is the cornerstone of patriarchy. Once a father loses the rights over his children, I think it's even said that the way that you control a wife, the way that you keep a wife bound to you, or way you keep families together, is by giving the father control of the children. The critical factor is that children were wealth back then, and in a sense they still are wealth. The patriarchy is built on basically who owns the children, right? Who owns property and who owns the children. One of these days we'll actually go through the 5 points about patriarchy, which is control of the children, a lineage, eternal lineage, rights, control of the house, all that kind of stuff. The thing is, the first 2 things or basically, and it's not something that's done from household to household. These are statutes. It's a societal statutes where these laws are engraved, where you go into court, paternal rights are assumed. If you go through this document, which I've already gone through it in another video, paternal rights were actually assumed. The father owned the property, the father owned the children, the father owned everything. And if he divorced his wife, he compensated her for her use. The Court of the Chancery handed it over and putting these rights or these kind of discretions in the hand of the judge through this statute called Patriarchy, which is basically means the king is the father of the whole country, and putting this power of discretion in the hands of the judge. And we're going to explain to you why this has actually evolved into what I call a white gynocracy. The first one discussing prehistory 1839 of English child custody law. More prevalent one in recent years has been to recount the history in order to provide background for a history of American family law. The second mode, popular until the early 1970s, has been to trace the history of Patriarchy, the ancient English doctrine that the king, as father of the nation, has the power to act in protection of the nation's weak and powerless, namely infants, idiots, and lunatics. Today, in both the United States and England's Patriarchy is used in a variety of contexts, from protection of the mentally ill to the law of juvenile courts, in order to justify the state's power to intervene. Scholars exploring the scope of this doctrine have have had the occasion to examine its history. Now, we can actually go through all this stuff, which we're not. I've already gone through this stuff, but the Patriarchy, which gives the court the right to intervene, and in order to justify the state's power to intervene. But if you think about it, if you actually Google Patriarchy, it's used in more than just family court now. It's used in things like eminent domain, the right to seize property, the right to build over your property, like the pipelines in the north, right, that's built over Indian territory. The Patriarchy gives the courts, it gives the state the right to intervene on private property or private matters. So what we think of as patriarchy or something like that, where men have absolute rights, as the patriarchy was actually deemed for 3,000 years up until like 1839. Really, 1660 Court of Chancery, but it wasn't even invoked until 1839. That gave the state the right to intervene. I've read something, and we might go into this later. I mean, I'm just doing this as a note. If we should go further, then we need to we'll pull in more things. The Court of Chancery's right to intervene in matters, in personal matters, in private matters, ultimately for the protection of the weak, is just like our Supreme Court, just like our state Supreme Courts, even our local judicial courts. They have the right to intervene on personal matters. That's how come the judge can not only take a child, because the child does not belong to you, the child belongs to the state, because the ultimate parent of the child is the state, according to Patriarchy. They assign parental rights to individuals, whether it's mother or father. That's how come you have 50-50. And that's how come you can have the tender years doctrine, where the child is assigned to the mother up until age 16, or really adulthood. But the father, even under English law, is responsible, financially responsible for the child up until the age of 21. So what they did was they assigned the rights and custody of the child to the mother, and assigned the cost and the responsibility of maintaining the child to the father, even to the point where now there's no such thing as illegitimacy, because the court has deemed that out of wedlock mother that has a baby out of wedlock, has the same legal rights to the father's wealth and the father's protection and the father's maintenance that a baby born with a husband, with a legal father. How come there's no more illegitimate children? Because all babies born, if they can prove paternity, have the same access and the same claim to a father's wealth that a baby born in wedlock does. And that's done by the state. Because the state assigns, it can assign that claim, assign that burden onto that father. That's like when you have assigned a father that has no biological connection with that child. It can still be assigned guardianship or basically a claim to that father's wealth. That father can still be assigned responsibility of that child to the age of 18, even if he has no biological connection with that child. The Supreme Court is our court of chancery. That's how come they can either allow a woman to actually abort the child and override certain things as far as law, and also do what? Restrict abortion. Tell the FDA to actually restrict birth control. All that had to be allowed. All that had to be allowed by not only the state, which is legislature, but also by the Supreme Court. Civil rights under the social contract, even though it's law, was actually also allowed, just like in Brown versus Board of Education. It's intervened into private matters. All citizens are considered wards of the state and under the jurisdiction of the state and under the jurisdiction of the courts. So basically, men are not in charge. The state of the Leviathan, as they put it, as Hobbes put it, actually determines disputes between individuals. Hobbes said in order to have a civilized country, to get away from the law of the jungle, you have to have overriding structure that will actually settle disputes between people. An agreement between people to allow the state or the state or this Leviathan, this so-called neutral figure, to actually settle disputes. That's what your courts are for. That's what your lawmakers are for. That's what your state is for. Just because you have a man in a position, president, congressman, senator, even judge, is irrelevant to what we call a patriarchy. The patriarchy is the empire of the father. You have no more patriarchal rules. Those patriarchal rules have been wiped out. In fact, increasingly since 1865, women have gained more and more and more rights and rules, to the point now, since the second wave feminism, they have more privileges and have more rules and more laws in their favor than the men do. So the patriarchal empire of the father has been dead for 200 years. And what little advantages that men did have inside this structure, inside the society, has been eroded by the Court of Chancery of the Supreme Court or the state under Parens Patriae. Parens Patriae is actually the law of the land, which is parental control. Parental control by the state is what we're under. So they can determine who gets what, who gets advantages, who gets affirmative action, who gets taught, and how do you get taught. Like Me Too, no man actually voted for Me Too. Barack Obama sent a letter and the courts backed it up. And all of a sudden, Me Too, Believe All Women, all that crap was actually put into law. Child support was determined by what the state would pay. All of a sudden, the Parens Patriae came in and said, no, the child is entitled to a certain percentage of the father's wealth. Not a contract that he signed, not something that he voted in. The state just came in and said, we're going to take this much and we're going to use this statute to do it. The way it's supposed to work, right? That underprivileged people, according to the Parens Patriae, was supposed to be protected by the state. Now, that wasn't the case under Jim Crow because a lot of black men got hung. The Civil Rights Bill was supposed to correct wrongs that was done to underserved and oppressed peoples, which was black women, but especially black men. But just like Caroline Norton, white feminist women appealed to the state, had their needs put in under sex, and then enhanced under Title IX. And so what the state did under the aegis of Parens Patriae was basically do what they did in the 19th century under the 10 Years Doctrine. Take rights away from the men and give them to the woman, but still give men responsibility for maintaining. So what you have is a state-run gynocracy in the United States. The same thing you have in the UK. You have a state-run gynocracy where the parent state, the nanny state, actually rules in favor of the women and give the women all these advantages. So what you have is rule of woman, where they get all the advantages, all the laws are in their favor, was actually enforced by the superstructure, which is the Leviathan, which is the state, which is the courts. So feminists saying that they fight the patriarchy, they're actually not fighting the patriarchy. They're trying to get more claims out of the superstructure, which is the state, which is the nanny state, to get more advantages, to extract more wealth out of the men. And the pendulum has swung so far to the gynocracy, to the gynarchy, or to the gynocentric side, that men are actually not only just rebelling, they've ceased rebelling, they're quitting, which is what they're afraid of, which is what the white superstructure all over the Western superstructure all over the world is afraid of, that men are going to quit and not agree to this society that they've formally agreed to. You got to remember, parents, patriarchy, the society, the courts, the legislature is all in agreement. We agree to hand over our rights, or a portion of our rights, to the state to make this whole thing work. And men are basically saying, okay, we know we're going to take some of these rights back. Since you're not a neutral, fair actor, we're going to take some of these rights back. Men are not in control here as an entity. There is no such thing as a patriarchy in the West. What you have is a nanny state acting as mother or father. It's actually really sexless. But they're acting just like the slave master did on the plantation with black women. He superseded the rights of the man in favor of the woman to actually extract wealth through children from that woman. And the slave master put the woman in charge of the family, put the woman in charge of her household by force. And that's what Patriarchy does. Not only first starting with black men and black women, and then after 1964, and especially after 1972 in Title IX, put white women in charge of their children, their household, their finances, and actually took rights, took wealth away from the men. So basically, you have the same thing. You have rule by women through the aegis or through the force of the state. A woman can haul you into court for rape just on her word. Now, is she doing it with guns and billy clubs and stuff like that to that man? No. She accesses the state, the parental state, which is the Leviathan. Say, come pick that guy up. Come put him in jail. I'll fire him from his job. Boot him out of college because I said that I don't feel safe around him. I said that he had sex with me without consent. I don't want him to look at me, which is the male gaze. He can't open his legs on the what they call man spreading on a bus. That is the nanny state implementing a female's nature, female control over that man. So what you have, just like you have in the black community, you have a de facto matriarchy, a de facto gynocracy enforced by the state. Now, white men have adopted that model and are using it the same way that black women have for 100 years. So you have a de facto white gynocracy inside the United States, in the UK. But since there's no female face on this Leviathan, they can claim that it's men actually giving these rights and men actually doing this. And that really what they're fighting is the freaking patriarchy. They're not fighting the patriarchy. They're not even fighting the system. What they're trying to do is extract more wealth and more concessions from a system that's already a gynocracy. They determine what's misogyny. They determine what's patriarchy. They determine what's right or wrong. And we're going to deconstruct all these structures. 1972, the state, Patriarchy, handed over custody of the children, of the educational system, the indoctrination centers that our children go through to the female. And anytime the men wanted to take a modicum of power back, the state stepped in to stop it, to the point where the only rights men really have is to work, fight, and die for the society. Anywho, that's all I got for this one. Just wanted to talk about this. This is BGS out, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.